The year was 1876, and the dust of Willow Creek Station tasted like a lie. It coated Evangeline Hartwell's tongue, settled in the folds of her blue cotton dress, and clouded the air with broken promises. For 3 hours, she'd been sitting on a rough wooden crate, a solitary island in a sea of strangers who had long since moved on. Every new face was a flicker of hope, a potential match for the man she had crossed a country to marry. Joshua Whitmore. The name was a prayer on her lips, but he was nowhere. The sun bled across the horizon, setting fire to the distant mountains, and a cold dread began to seep into her bones, colder than the approaching desert night. She clutched the worn leather of her satchel, the only thing in this world that felt like her own. She didn't know that 20 miles away, a horse was being pushed to its limit, its hooves hammering a desperate rhythm against the hard-packed earth. The rider, Nathaniel Garrison, had heard the news in town that morning. An abandoned bride, waiting for a ghost. Something in his chest, a place he thought had died long ago, roared to life. He couldn't let her sit there. He just couldn't. As darkness swallowed the last of the light, Evangeline's back ached. The station master, a kind man with a face like a weathered map, had offered help twice. She'd refused, her pride a thin shield against the terrifying truth. "He's coming," she'd insisted. He promised. But the platform was empty now, save for the tumbleweeds that danced in the mournful wind. Doubt was no longer a frost at the edges of her heart. It was a flood, threatening to drown her. She pulled the letter from her pocket, its creases as familiar as her own hands. "Meet me at Willow Creek Station. September 15th. 2 Wash Sharp." Joshua's elegant script had been her gospel for 3 long months. "I'll be the one with the brown hat and the wildflowers." It had all seemed like a miracle then, back in the grime and clang of Philadelphia. She was a seamstress, her fingers pricked and raw, her future a cramped room in her aunt's boarding house. Her parents were gone, victims of the great influenza, their memory a constant dull ache. The small cobbler shop, her father's life's work, sold for debts. Her mother's jewelry, gone to pay for the funerals. Aunt Prudence had taken her in, but every glance was a reminder that Evangeline was a burden. 12 hours a day, she hunched over a sewing machine at Morrison's dress shop, stitching clothes for women whose lives she could never imagine. The air was thick with lint and unspoken desperation. She was disappearing, one stitch at a time, into a life of gray monotony. Then came the advertisement. "Honest rancher seeks virtuous woman for marriage. Must be willing to work hard and start a new life in Colorado territory." Hope, fierce and blinding, had surged through her. His letters were her escape. Joshua wrote of open skies and clean mountain air, of building a life with his own 2 hands. He painted a picture of a partnership, a world away from the servitude she knew. A man and woman should be partners in all things, he'd written. "I need someone who can find joy in simple pleasures, who isn't afraid of a little dirt under her fingernails." He made it all feel so real. He wrote of his mare, Duchess, who stole apples from his pocket. He described the wild flowers that carpeted the meadows in spring. He asked about her dreams, her thoughts, her fears. He made her feel seen. When the train ticket arrived with his proposal, it felt like salvation. Now, sitting on that crate with 47 cents in her purse, salvation felt like a cruel joke. What if he'd changed his mind? What if he'd found someone else? What if the letters, the life, the man himself? What if it was all just a beautiful lie? A freight wagon rumbled past, its noise a brief distraction from the growl in her stomach. She hadn't eaten since morning, her nerves a tight knot of anticipation. Now, pride kept her silent. To ask for food would be to admit defeat, to admit she had been a fool. She had to face it. He wasn't coming. 47 cents wouldn't buy a meal, let alone a ticket back to Philadelphia. And what was there to go back to? Her room was rented, her job was filled. Her aunt's door was surely closed to her now. She was trapped, suspended between a life she had fled and a future that had just evaporated into the dust. The train ride had been 4 days of transformation. The smokestacks of Pennsylvania gave way to rolling farms, then to prairies so vast they seemed to swallow the sky. She had imagined their first meeting 1,000 times, rehearsed conversations, worried if she would be pretty enough, strong enough, good enough. Now, all those hopes felt like ash in her mouth. The station master approached again, his boots scuffing softly on the wooden platform. His face was etched with a pity she couldn't bear. "Miss," he began, his voice gentle, "it's getting real late. Are you certain someone's coming for you?" The dam of her composure finally broke. A tear escaped, then another, tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. "I thought so, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But perhaps I was mistaken. What's your name, child?" "Evangeline Hartwell. I came from Philadelphia to marry Mr. Joshua Whitmore." A shadow crossed the station master's face. He glanced around, as if to make sure they were alone. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial hush. "Joshua Whitmore, you say?" "Yes. Do you know him?" The old man took off his cap, running a hand through his thin gray hair. The look in his eyes was one of deep, profound regret. "I'm afraid I do, miss. And I'm afraid I've got some terrible news for you." Evangeline's blood ran cold. She braced herself for the words she already knew were coming. But the truth was far worse than she could ever imagine. "Joshua Whitmore lit out of here 2 weeks ago," the station master said, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if they burned his tongue. "He left behind a gambling debt the size of a small horse and a reputation for promises he never intended to keep." The world seemed to fall away beneath her. It wasn't just that he'd abandoned her. He had never been real in the first place. The ranch, the partnership, the life he'd described, it was all a fiction, a carefully crafted trap. "He came through here for about 6 months, the man continued, his voice laced with pity, always talking big about his land and his cattle. But folks started noticing his stories didn't add up. Then Mickey at the saloon started asking about the money Joshua owed him. Turned out Mr. Whitmore was living on credit and charm, betting on cards with money he didn't have." The station master's gaze was filled with a terrible, sorrowful weight. "And miss, you ain't the first. Word is he's done this to at least 2 other women, lured them out here with pretty words, then vanished." Each word was a hammer blow, shattering the last remnants of her dream. She was not just abandoned, she was a victim, a pawn in a cruel game played by a man she had never truly known. She was alone, penniless, and disgraced in a strange land. She stared out into the unforgiving darkness, the vast emptiness of the desert, a perfect mirror for the hollowness inside her. She had never felt so small, so utterly and completely lost. Just then, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the quiet despair. Fast, determined. A rider emerged from the darkness, a tall silhouette against the star-dusted sky. He dismounted with a fluid grace, his boots making a solid, reassuring sound on the platform. He wasn't wearing a brown hat, and he carried no wildflowers. This was not Joshua. This was something else entirely. Nate Garrison had pushed his horse, Comanche, harder than he should have. The urgency he felt was a physical thing, a fire in his gut. When old Pete, the station master, had told him about the woman waiting for Joshua Whitmore, a cold fury had seized him. He knew Joshua, knew his charm, and knew the rot that lay beneath it. This anger was an old, familiar friend. It had been his constant companion since Martha died. His wife. The memory of her was a ghost that walked beside him every day. Her gentle laugh, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she made their simple ranch house feel like a kingdom. They'd been married 2 blissful years, with a child on the way, their future stretching out before them like a sunlit road. Then, one stormy night, the road had crumbled into a chasm. The birth went wrong. The doctor was delayed. By the time he arrived, it was too late. Nate had held Martha as she slipped away, their newborn son following her into the silent dark less than an hour later. In a single night, his world had ended. Grief had hollowed him out. He'd thrown himself into the ranch, working until his body screamed for rest, trying to outrun the pain. Mrs. Rodriguez, a widow herself, had appeared like a quiet angel, sensing his need. She took over the house, her steady presence a balm on his raw soul. Over time, he'd learned to function again, but he'd walled off his heart. Love was a risk he would never take again. Love was a thief that had stolen everything from him once. But hearing about this woman, this Evangeline Hartwell, abandoned and alone, it had breached the walls. It wasn't just the injustice of it. It was the name. Joshua Whitmore. A name that brought a bitter, metallic taste to his mouth. He knew Joshua had worked on a neighboring ranch the year before, knew his reputation for laziness, for lies, for a temper that could flash like lightning. He'd been fired after money went missing. Nate had no doubt Joshua was capable of this cruelty, and the thought of an innocent woman caught in his web filled him with a protective rage he hadn't felt in years. He didn't fully understand why he was writing to her, what he would even say. He wasn't looking for a wife. The ghost of Martha still slept in his bed, but he couldn't leave her to the wolves. He couldn't let Joshua claim another victim without a fight. As the lights of the station pierced the gloom, he saw her, a lone figure huddled on a crate, looking so small against the vast, dark expanse of the west. His heart clenched. She looked like a lost bird, her wings broken. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. In the lamplight, he saw her face, young, framed by auburn hair that had fought its way free of its pins. Her dress was simple, but she wore it with a straight-backed dignity that defied her circumstances. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. He removed his hat. "Are you Miss Hartwell?" She looked up, startled. Her eyes were blue, but shadowed with fear and exhaustion. They were also wary. He saw intelligence there, a quickness that was sizing him up. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice cautious. "How do you know my name?" "Pete, the station master. He told me about your situation." He gestured vaguely toward the empty tracks. "I'm Nathaniel Garrison. Folks call me Nate. I own a ranch about 20 miles from here." She watched him, her gaze unwavering. He could feel her searching for the angle, the trick. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Garrison, but I'm not sure there's anything you can do." He knelt, bringing himself to her level, trying to appear less intimidating. "Miss Hartwell, I know this is sudden, and you don't know me from Adam, but I have a proposition for you." He saw her stiffen immediately, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. She thought he was one of those men. "Nothing improper," he added quickly, holding up a hand. "I swear on my life. I'm talking about honest work. I need help on my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, is getting older. She could use an assistant. The work is hard, but the pay is fair. You'd have your own room, food, and absolute respectability." Her eyes narrowed, filled with a sharp, piercing question. "Why? Why would you help a total stranger?" The real answer was complicated, tangled in a history of pain and anger he couldn't possibly explain. So he gave her the simplest version of the truth. "Because Joshua Whitmore is a coward," he said, his voice tight, "and no woman should have to pay for his sins." He paused, the next words coming from a deeper, more honest place. "And because I know what it feels like to be alone." Something in his eyes must have reached her. Some shared understanding of loss. He saw the tension in her shoulders ease, just a fraction. It was a gamble, for both of them. He was a stranger offering a lifeline. She was a castaway deciding if it was attached to a ship or an anchor. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I would be grateful for the work, Mr. Garrison." Then she added with a hint of that defiant pride, But I should warn you, my experience with ranch life is non-existent. A smile, the first genuine one in what felt like years, touched his lips. I figure anyone brave enough to travel 2,000 miles to start a new life has enough grit to learn just about anything. And just like that, an agreement was struck. He loaded her trunk into the back of his wagon. As she climbed onto the seat beside him, the stars overhead seemed to burn with a new intensity. For the first time since stepping off that train, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in the darkness of her heart. But as the wagon lurched forward, pulling her away from the lonely station and into an unknown future with this mysterious, dark-eyed stranger, she couldn't shake a terrifying thought. She was running from one man's lies straight into the arms of another man's secrets. The 2-hour ride to the ranch was a journey through a landscape of shadows and moonlight. Nate spoke in a low, quiet voice, telling her about his cattle, the rhythms of the seasons, the constant struggle against drought and disease. He spoke of his late wife, Martha, his voice softening with a reverence that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Evangeline, in turn, told him of Philadelphia, of the endless stitching, of a life she was glad to have left behind, even if her escape had been a disaster. As they crested a final rise, a cluster of buildings appeared, silhouetted against the night sky. "That's it," Nate said. "Home." But as they drew closer, the silhouette resolved into a starker reality. The ranch house was large, yes, but it sagged, weary and worn. Fences were down in several places, their posts leaning like tired old men. The corrals were in disrepair. In the moonlight, the place didn't look prosperous. It looked like it was dying. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept down Evangeline's spine. This was not the haven she had pictured. This was a place clinging to life by its fingernails. A woman appeared on the porch, holding a lantern aloft. She was older, her hair streaked with silver, her face a road map of hard years. This must be Mrs. Rodriguez. Nate helped Evangeline down from the wagon. "Elena," he said, "this is Miss Hartwell. She'll be helping you out for a while." Mrs. Rodriguez did not smile. Her dark eyes swept over Evangeline, a quick, dismissive appraisal from head to toe. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a cold, hard suspicion. She said something to Nate in rapid-fire Spanish, her tone sharp and questioning. He answered in a low, tired voice. The welcome Evangeline had hoped for, the motherly embrace, never came. Instead, Mrs. Rodriguez simply turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door open in a gesture that was anything but inviting. Inside, the house was clean but threadbare. The furniture was worn, the rugs faded. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and something else. A faint, lingering sorrow. Mrs. Rodriguez showed her to a small, stark room at the back of the house. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window looking out into the blackness. "Senor Garrison is a good man," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice flat, her English heavily accented. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, blocking any escape. "But he is a man who carries many ghosts." She paused, her eyes boring into Evangeline. "This house, it has a memory. It remembers its true mistress. It does not like strangers." The words were a clear warning. "You are not welcome here." Evangeline's heart sank. She had traded one kind of prison for another. The next morning confirmed her fears. The work was relentless. From dawn till dusk, she was scrubbing floors, mending clothes for the handful of rough-looking ranch hands, weeding a vegetable garden that seemed determined to give up and die. Mrs. Rodriguez watched her every move, her silence a constant, heavy judgment. There were no friendly chats, no shared cups of coffee, just orders and critical glances. The ranch hands, too, kept their distance. They were a grim, quiet bunch, their faces etched with the same worry she saw in Nate. They ate their meals quickly, their eyes downcast, as if the weight of the failing ranch was a physical burden on their shoulders. This wasn't the boisterous, familial atmosphere she had imagined. It was awake. She saw Nate only in passing. He was gone before sunrise and returned long after dark, his face grim, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. The kind, concerned man from the station had been replaced by a haunted stranger. When their eyes did meet, she saw a flicker of something in his, regret, perhaps, before he looked away, retreating back into his fortress of solitude. One evening, desperate for a moment of peace, Evangeline was mending a tear in one of Nate's shirts by the fading light. Mrs. Rodriguez entered the kitchen, silent as a phantom. "You should not be here," the old woman said, her voice a low hiss. Evangeline looked up, her needle poised. "Mr. Garrison offered me a job. I'm earning my keep." "A job?" Mrs. Rodriguez let out a short, harsh laugh. "You think that is what this is? You are a fool, little bird, just like she was." "She?" Evangeline asked, though she knew the answer. "Martha, his wife, the lady of this house." The housekeeper's eyes glittered with a fierce, protective loyalty. "He brings you here, another pretty face from the east, and thinks he can replace her. He cannot. This land, it is soaked in her memory, in her blood." The word hung in the air between them. Blood. "What are you talking about?" Evangeline whispered. "He told me she died in childbirth." Mrs. Rodriguez's face twisted into a dark, knowing smirk. "That is the story he tells. That is the story everyone tells." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "He brought you here for a reason, girl, and it is not the one he told you. This place is cursed. You should run. Run before it swallows you, too." Before Evangeline could respond, the old woman turned and vanished into the shadows of the house, leaving Evangeline alone in the flickering lamplight, her heart pounding a frantic tattoo against her ribs. Childbirth. That is the story he tells. What other story was there? What had really happened to Martha? And what terrible secret was this dying ranch hiding? She was trapped, surrounded by hostile silence and unspoken threats. The hope she had felt just days ago had curdled into pure, chilling fear. Sleep became a luxury Evangeline could no longer afford. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind outside her window sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. Mrs. Rodriguez's words echoed in her mind. "This place is cursed. Run before it swallows you, too." But where could she run? She was a prisoner, bound to this failing ranch by her poverty and her pride. Her only possessions of any meaning were the clothes on her back and the small bundle of letters from Joshua Whitmore. She had kept them, though she wasn't sure why. A masochistic reminder of her own foolishness, perhaps. One night, unable to bear the oppressive silence of her room, she lit her small lamp and untied the ribbon that bound them. She spread them out on the rough wooden blanket chest. His elegant looping script, which had once seemed so romantic, now looked like the weaving of a spider. She read the familiar phrases, the pretty lies about mountain sunrises, and a life of shared joy. It was all poison. She was about to gather them up and burn them, to purge his memory from her life forever. But something stopped her. Her mind, honed by years of stitching intricate patterns, of seeing the hidden structure beneath the surface of the fabric, suddenly saw something else. It was in the repetition. Certain words appeared far more often than they should have. "My dear heart," he started every letter, "the land here holds its own deep secrets. Water is the true treasure. I often follow the path of the morning star." It was nonsense, the flowery prose of a con man. But what if it wasn't? Her seamstress brain took over, looking not at the words themselves, but at their placement, their frequency. It was like finding a flaw in a weave, a thread that was out of place. She took out a pencil and a spare sheet of paper, her hands trembling slightly. She started to make lists. phrases, repeated words, odd capitalizations that she had dismissed as eccentricities: heart, deep, treasure, star, path, water. It was a jumble, yet it felt like something, like the pieces of a pattern before they are stitched together. She remembered one letter in particular, where he'd described a specific grove of aspen trees. "Their leaves tremble like 1,000 golden coins," he had written. "They stand guard where the old bear sleeps in winter." It had seemed so poetic at the time. Now it felt specific. Too specific. She worked through the night, the world outside her window fading away. The ranch, the hostile housekeeper, the haunted man who employed her, all of it vanished. There was only her, the letters, and the burgeoning, insane idea that she was on the verge of a discovery. By dawn, her page was covered in notes. It was still a mess, a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But she was certain of one thing. These weren't love letters. They were something else. A code, a map. And Joshua Whitmore, the man who had abandoned her, had left her the key. That morning, she felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, but it was now mingled with something new: purpose. She was no longer just a victim. She was a detective. She began to watch, to listen. She paid attention to the ranch hands' conversations, snippets about property lines, about the ever-present threat of the drought, about the river that marked their southern border, a river whose flow was shrinking with every passing week. She learned the name of the man who held the mortgage on the ranch, Mr. Blackwood, the town banker. A man whose name was always spoken in hushed, fearful tones. He was squeezing Nate. Everyone knew it. The ranch was one bad season away from belonging to him. This new knowledge cast the puzzle of the letters in a different light. Water is the true treasure. Of course it was. In a land dying of thirst, water was more valuable than gold. She needed more information. She needed to talk to Nate. But how? He was a fortress, and she had no way to breach the walls. She decided to risk confronting him. It was a terrifying prospect. He was her employer, her reluctant savior. Accusing him of hiding things could get her thrown out, left with nothing. But staying silent, caught in this web of secrets, was no longer an option. That evening, she waited for him on the porch. He arrived late, as usual, looking like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He stopped when he saw her, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. "Mr. Garrison," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need to talk." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "Miss Hartwell, I'm not in the mood for—" "This isn't about the housekeeping," she cut him off, holding up the bundle of letters. "It's about these. It's about your brother." The name hit him like a physical blow. All the weariness vanished from his face, replaced by a shuttered, dangerous stillness. He stared at her, his jaw tight, his eyes turning to chips of ice. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low and cold. "Don't you?" she challenged, her own fear making her bold. "Joshua Whitmore, your brother, the liar who brought me here. The coward you failed to mention was related to you." The silence on the porch was deafening, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Nate's carefully constructed walls crumbled. The exhaustion, the grief, the anger he had held back for so long flooded into his expression. He looked not at her, but through her, at a past she couldn't see. He finally sagged against a porch column, the fight gone out of him. "How did you know?" he whispered. "The letters," she said, tapping the bundle. "They're not what they seem. And you brought me here for a reason. Not just out of kindness. You brought me here because of him, because of these letters, didn't you?" He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw the raw desperation in his eyes. He wasn't a monster. He was a man drowning. "Yes," he admitted, the word a ragged exhalation of breath. "Joshua is my brother, my curse. I've been cleaning up his messes my entire life." He gestured around at the dying ranch. "This is his latest masterpiece. He racked up debts with Blackwood, using the ranch as collateral on promises I never made. Now Blackwood is calling them due." "So you brought me here hoping I had something? Some clue?" "I didn't know," he confessed. "It was a long shot, a desperate hope. I knew Joshua. He was a fool, but he was a clever fool. He loved games, riddles. I thought, maybe he left something behind, a hint, a way out." He looked at the letters in her hand. "What did you find?" "I think it's a map," she said softly. "To water." Nate stared at her, a dawning horror and hope mingling in his eyes. But before he could speak, Evangeline pushed further, needing to know the rest. "Mrs. Rodriguez said something," she pressed, her heart hammering. "About your wife, about Martha. She said her death wasn't what you said it was." Nate flinched, as if she had struck him. The look on his face was one of such profound pain that she almost regretted asking. He turned away, staring out into the blackness. "Joshua was here that night," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The night Martha died. They argued. I heard them. By the time I got there, she had fallen. He was gone. The confession hung in the air, a terrible, poisonous thing. Martha hadn't just died. Joshua had been there, and Nate had been covering it up ever since. The revelation shattered the fragile peace of the night. Nate's confession was not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of a truth more tangled and dangerous than Evangeline had ever conceived. Joshua wasn't just a con man. He was a specter haunting this ranch, his actions directly linked to the death of his brother's wife. Nate, broken open by his own admission, finally told her the whole story. Joshua had always been the charming one, the favorite, while Nate was the steady, responsible older brother. Their father had left the ranch to Nate, a decision Joshua had never forgiven. He'd drifted in and out of their lives, always bringing trouble, borrowing money, making promises he couldn't keep. The night Martha died, Joshua had shown up drunk and belligerent, demanding money. Nate had been out with the ranch hands, trying to save a calf born in the storm. He'd left Martha, heavy with child, alone in the house. A mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his days. "They were shouting," Nate recounted, his voice thick with unshed tears. He was saying terrible things, that the baby wasn't mine, that Martha had always loved him. He shook his head, a gesture of deep self-loathing. "They were lies, I know they were. But he was cruel. He wanted to hurt us." Nate had raced back to the house to find Martha at the bottom of the main staircase, unconscious. Joshua was gone. The doctor, delayed by the flooded creek, arrived too late to save her or the child. The official story was a tragic accident. A pregnant woman, dizzy, had simply fallen. Nate had never told anyone Joshua was there. To do so would be to admit his own failure to protect his wife, and to bring a scandal down upon a family name that was already struggling. Evangeline listened, her own anger at Nate for his deception warring with a profound sympathy for his pain. He wasn't just a man hiding a secret, he was a man trapped in a prison of grief and guilt. This new, terrible knowledge gave her a new sense of urgency. The map in the letters wasn't just about saving the ranch anymore. It was about finding a truth that had been buried for 3 years. It was about justice for Martha. The next day, a change had settled over the ranch house. Nate's confession had broken the dam of silence between them. He now looked at Evangeline not as an employee, but as a confederate, an ally. Even Mrs. Rodriguez seemed to sense the shift. The old woman's hostility softened into a grudging respect. Seeing Nate and Evangeline working together, poring over the letters at the kitchen table late into the night, seemed to unlock something in her. One afternoon, while Nate was out checking the fences, Mrs. Rodriguez approached Evangeline. In her hands was a small, leather-bound journal. "This was hers," she said quietly, holding it out. Martha's. Evangeline took the book with trembling hands. Why are you giving this to me? Because you have his trust, the housekeeper replied, her dark eyes filled with a deep sadness. He has not trusted anyone since she died, and because she was clever, like you. She saw things other people missed. Mrs. Rodriguez looked toward the stairs, a haunted expression on her face. She did not fall, señorita. I have never believed it. She was a strong woman, sure-footed. She knew this house better than anyone. The housekeeper's validation sent a chill down Evangeline's spine. She wasn't just imagining things. Martha's death was a murder, hidden in plain sight. Later that night, Evangeline opened the journal. Martha's handwriting was neat and precise, a stark contrast to Joshua's flamboyant script. The pages were filled with the daily details of ranch life, her love for Nate, her hopes for their child. Reading it felt like an intimate, heartbreaking violation. Then she found it. Tucked between 2 pages was a single pressed wildflower, a scarlet gilia. Evangeline's breath caught in her throat. She scrambled for Joshua's letters. In one of them he had written, "The mountains blush with a flower the color of a lover's lips, a tiny scarlet star that points the way." It was another clue, but there was more. On the page where the flower had been pressed, Martha had written a short, cryptic note. "Jay knows where the water sleeps. He boasted of it, said it was his ace in the hole. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. It would ruin us all." Evangeline felt a jolt, as if lightning had struck the house. J. Joshua. He knew about a hidden water source. He had told Martha, and his knowledge of it had somehow terrified her. Why? Why would finding water ruin them? She took the journal and the letters to Nate. Together they spread everything out on the kitchen table, Joshua's coded letters, Martha's diary, the pressed flower. They were no longer 2 strangers bound by circumstance, but a team, united by a common purpose. "The scarlet gilia," Nate murmured, his finger tracing the delicate dried petals. "They only grow in one place on this property, high up in the North Canyon. It's a place my father always called the Devil's Washstand, because it's so dry and rocky. Nothing grows there but those flowers." "And the morning star," Evangeline added, pointing to one of Joshua's letters. "If you stand at the house and look towards the Devil's Washstand at dawn, you're looking due east," Nate finished, his eyes wide with a dawning realization. "Where the morning star rises." It all started to click into place. The path of the morning star, the place where the scarlet flowers grew, the old bear's den, a well-known cave in the canyon wall. Joshua's poetic nonsense wasn't poetry at all. It was a set of directions. But Martha's warning still troubled Evangeline. It would ruin us all. What did it mean? "Blackwood," Nate said, the name like a curse on his lips. "The water rights in this territory are a nightmare. The main river, the one that borders our property, he controls it upstream. That's how he's been strangling us. But if there was a new, independent source, a spring, on my land, it would save you," Evangeline said. "Or it would give him a reason to take the ranch by any means necessary," Nate countered, his face grim. "If word of a new spring got out, this land would be worth 10 times as much. Blackwood would never let it go. Martha must have known that. She knew what kind of man he was. She was afraid that if Joshua revealed the spring's location, Blackwood would find a way to steal it all. And that's exactly what Joshua, in his desperation for money, might have threatened to do. Sell the secret to Blackwood. That must have been the argument. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the horizon, they rode out. They carried shovels, a lantern, and the letters. The air was crisp and cold. As they rode, Evangeline felt a strange sense of destiny. She had come west to marry a lie, but she had stumbled into a truth that was far more important. They found the grove of aspens, their leaves now fallen, their white trunks like silent ghosts in the pre-dawn gloom. They found the cave, the old bear's den, and standing at its entrance, they looked back toward the ranch house due west. The morning star was a brilliant diamond hanging in the fading night sky. "This is the place," Nate said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and dread. Inside the cave, the air was cold and damp. Following the final clues in the letters, which spoke of a deep heart of stone, they found a section of the cave wall that looked different. It was a mosaic of smaller, tightly packed rocks, unlike the solid granite around it. It looked man-made, or at least man-altered. They set to work with the shovels, prying the rocks loose. It was back-breaking labor. For hours, they worked in the dim light of the lantern, their breath misting in the cold air. Hope began to fade, replaced by the grim ache of failure. Then Evangeline's shovel struck something that wasn't rock. It was wood, a set of old rotting timbers wedged deep behind the stone face. "Nate, look!" With renewed energy, they pulled the timbers away. Behind them was a dark, narrow opening. A cool, damp draft flowed out, carrying with it a scent she had almost forgotten. The smell of rich, wet earth, of life. Nate lowered the lantern into the opening. The light glinted off something below, the unmistakable shimmer of moving water. It was a spring, a powerful underground stream flowing deep beneath the rock. It was the ranch's salvation. A laugh, raw and triumphant, escaped Nate's lips. He turned to Evangeline, his face illuminated by the lantern light, his eyes shining with a gratitude so profound it stole her breath. He reached for her, his hands finding hers, and for a moment, they were just two people, on the verge of a new beginning. But as he opened his mouth to speak, a shadow fell across the entrance of the cave. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as a grave, echoed from the darkness. "Well, well, I knew you two were clever, but I must confess, I didn't think you'd be quite this quick." They both froze. Nate instinctively moved in front of Evangeline, shielding her. They turned toward the voice. Leaning against the cave wall, a sardonic smile playing on his lips, was a man. He was handsome, dressed in clothes that were a little too fine for the frontier, and in his hand he held a bouquet of wilted wildflowers. It was Joshua Whitmore. The sight of him was a physical shock. Joshua Whitmore was no longer the charming phantom from the letters. He was flesh and blood, and he radiated a dangerous, desperate energy. The wildflowers in his hand were a mocking tribute to the lie he had sold her. "Joshua," Nate breathed, his voice a low growl. He pushed Evangeline further behind him. "What are you doing here?" "What do you think I'm doing here, brother?" Joshua's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those were cold, calculating. "I came back for what's mine." His gaze flickered past Nate to Evangeline. "All of it." "You have nothing here," Nate snarled. "Oh, I wouldn't say that," Joshua said, taking a step into the cave. "I have the location of a spring that our dear father was clever enough to find and foolish enough to hide. A secret he passed on to me, not you. And I have my bride-to-be." He gave Evangeline a theatrical bow. "My dearest Evangeline, I do apologize for my delay. Business, you know." "You're a liar and a coward," Evangeline said, her voice shaking with a rage that eclipsed her fear. "You left me to rot." Joshua clicked his tongue. "A temporary inconvenience, I assure you. I always intended to come back for you, once I had secured our future." He gestured towards the hole leading to the spring. And here it is. The tension in the cave was thick enough to cut with a knife. The two brothers faced each other, a lifetime of resentment and betrayal crackling between them. "You were here," Nate said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The night Martha died." Joshua's charming facade faltered for a second. A flicker of something, fear, guilt, crossed his face before he masked it with a sneer. "Martha. Always Martha. You hid behind her skirts, and now you hide behind this one's. You were never man enough to run this ranch, Nate. Dad knew it. He gave it to you out of pity. You were arguing with her, Nate pressed, taking a step forward. I heard you. You threatened her. You threatened to tell Blackwood about the spring. She was going to ruin everything, Joshua suddenly shouted, his composure cracking. She was a sentimental fool. She wanted you to tell the whole world about the water, to share it. She didn't understand business. Blackwood would have paid a fortune for this secret. Enough for me to get away from you, from this cursed place, forever. So, you killed her? Nate's voice was a raw whisper. It was an accident, Joshua insisted, his eyes wide and frantic. We argued. She was hysterical. She slipped. She fell. I didn't touch her. I just ran. What was I supposed to do? The confession, ugly and cowardly, hung in the dusty air. He hadn't pushed her, perhaps, but his greed, his cruelty, had led directly to her death. Nate let out a roar of pure, animalistic rage and launched himself at his brother. The two men crashed against the cave wall, fists flying. It was a clumsy, brutal fight, fueled by years of pent-up hatred. Evangeline watched in horror, powerless to stop them. The lantern fell, its glass shattering, plunging the back of the cave into darkness, leaving only the gray light from the entrance. Suddenly, a new sound echoed through the cave. A sound that stopped both brothers cold. It was the metallic, unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. A new figure stood at the cave entrance, blocking the light. He was a portly man in a crisp suit, his face placid and unremarkable, which made the rifle in his hands all the more terrifying. Thank you, gentlemen, the man said, his voice calm and pleasant. You've saved me a great deal of digging. It was the banker, Mr. Blackwood. Blackwood, Nate gasped, wiping blood from his lip. I knew our father was hiding something, Blackwood said, stepping into the cave, his eyes gleaming as he glanced at the opening to the spring. I've been squeezing this ranch for years, waiting for one of you to break. I pushed you into debt, Joshua, knowing your cowardice would make you run. I held the mortgage over you, Nathaniel, knowing your pride would make you desperate. He smiled, a chilling, placid expression. I suspected it was water. I just needed you to find it for me. And you have. My geologists are on their way. By tomorrow, a new claim will be filed. This entire canyon will belong to the bank. The trap had been sprung. They had all been puppets, their actions manipulated from the very beginning by this soft-spoken monster. You won't get away with this, Nate said, his voice low. Blackwood simply chuckled. My dear boy, I already have. 2 brothers, known to hate each other, are found dead in a cave-in after a fight. The woman, well, she's a tragic witness who simply disappears. It's a sad story, but tidy. He raised the rifle, its dark muzzle pointed squarely at Nate's chest. This was it, the end. They were trapped, with no way out. But Blackwood had made one fatal miscalculation. He had focused on the men. He had dismissed the woman. While all eyes were on the rifle, Evangeline had been thinking. Her mind, the seamstress's mind that saw patterns and weaknesses, was racing. She saw the dry tinder on the cave floor. She saw the ranch hands' horses tied up just outside. She saw the heavy, dusty canvas sheet they had brought with them, now lying discarded near the entrance. In one fluid motion, she acted. She grabbed the canvas, and with a powerful heave she didn't know she possessed, flung it directly at Blackwood. It was a perfect shot. The heavy, dusty cloth enveloped his head, blinding him completely. He let out a startled cry, staggering backward, the rifle firing wildly into the cave roof. Rock and dust rained down. Run! Evangeline screamed. The brothers, stunned for a second, snapped into action. Nate shoved Joshua towards the entrance while Evangeline scrambled for the still smoldering wick from the broken lantern. She scooped it up, the embers burning her fingers, and thrust it into a pile of dry leaves and twigs near the entrance. They caught fire instantly. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to fill the small space. Blackwood, clawing the canvas from his face, was momentarily silhouetted against the growing flames. He coughed, his eyes watering, trying to aim the rifle through the smoke. Nate and Joshua scrambled out of the cave entrance, with Evangeline right behind them. The fire she'd set was already spreading, a curtain of smoke and flame blocking the entrance. They could hear Blackwood shouting in rage and confusion from within. They didn't wait. They untied the horses, leaped onto their backs, and galloped away from the cave as fast as they could, not looking back. The sound of their horses' hooves was the sound of a future they had just stolen back from the jaws of death. They had escaped. But the smoke rising from the canyon behind them was a signal. The whole world would know their secret now. Their fight was far from over. They rode hard, not stopping until the smoky plume from the cave was a faint smudge on the horizon. They finally reined in their horses on a high mesa overlooking the ranch, the familiar buildings looking small and fragile in the distance. The three of them were a strange, bedraggled trio, battered, smoke-stained, and bound by the shared trauma of the last hour. The silence was heavy with unspoken words. Joshua was the first to break it. He slid off his horse, his bravado gone, replaced by a hollowed-out emptiness. He couldn't meet Nate's eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "Nate, about Martha, I never meant for it to happen. I was a coward." Nate looked down at his brother, the fury in his eyes replaced by a vast, weary sadness. The hatred that had fueled him for 3 years had been burned away in the cave, leaving only the ash of grief. "I know," Nate said, and it was the truth. He had seen the terror on Joshua's face when he confessed. He was not a murderer. He was just weak, and his weakness had cost them everything. "I have to go," Joshua said, turning to his horse. "I'll ride into town. I'll tell Sheriff Miller everything, about Blackwood, about what happened that night, all of it. I'll face whatever's coming." It was the first truly honorable thing Nate had ever heard him say. He gave a single, solemn nod. Joshua then turned to Evangeline. The shame on his face was profound. "I lied to you," he said. "I used you. I am sorry for the man you thought I was, and even sorrier for the man that I am." Evangeline looked at the man who had so thoroughly upended her life. She saw no trace of the villain from the cave, or the romantic from the letters. She just saw a broken man, finally facing the consequences of his actions. "Go," she said softly, "and try to be better." He mounted his horse, gave one last haunted look at his brother and the ranch he had lost, and then rode away, a solitary figure heading towards his reckoning. Nate and Evangeline stood alone on the mesa, watching him go. The vast landscape that had once seemed so threatening now felt full of a quiet, stark beauty. "He'll talk," Nate said. "The story of the spring will be all over the territory by morning. Blackwood's claim will be challenged. The law will have to get involved." "And you?" she asked. "What will you do?" He finally turned to look at her, really look at her. His eyes were clear, the ghosts in them finally at rest. He saw her not as a housekeeper, not as a victim, but as the woman who had stood her ground in a dark cave and saved them all. "The ranch is still failing," he said, a hint of a wry smile on his lips. "We still have a mountain of debt, and now we have a legal fight on our hands that could last for years." He took a step closer, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "It's not much of a life to offer someone." "You once wrote to me about a partnership," Evangeline said, her voice quiet but strong. "About building something lasting with your own 2 hands. About finding joy in simple pleasures." Nate's eyes widened. "Those weren't my words." "No," she agreed. "They were his. They were lies." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "But what if we could make them true?" In that moment, under the vast Colorado sky, a new understanding passed between them. This wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't about a damsel in distress and a knight in shining armor. It was about two broken people who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives. It was about forging something real and strong out of lies and hardship. Nate reached out and took her hand. His was calloused and rough. Hers was small, but steady. "I didn't rescue you at that station, Evangeline Hartwell," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You came here, and you rescued me." Her journey west had begun with a lie, led her through a maze of secrets, and thrown her into the heart of a deadly fight. She had come seeking a husband and a home, but had found something far more valuable. She had found her own strength. She had found a man who saw her for who she truly was, and together, standing on that windswept mesa, they were ready to face the future, not with the promise of an easy life, but with the grit and hope to build a real one. Their life wasn't a story that had been written for them. It was one they would have to write themselves, one day at a time. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. The abandoned bride had finally found her home. The road to a new beginning is never a straight line, and sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden behind the most painful truths. If you believe in the power of second chances, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more stories that dig deep. And let us know in the comments below. Who do you think was the true villain of this story? Was it the coward, the banker, or the man who hid the truth? We can't wait to read your thoughts.